So hello everyone and welcome to another Creative Futures session. My name is Graeme Park and this is the programme where I talk to a variety of creative industry professionals in front of an online audience this week of students from Glyndwr University. Today we're joined by someone I've known for many years and someone that I've worked with as well. Please welcome the musician, the broadcaster, artist and charity fundraiser, Clint Boon. Hello, Clint.
How are you, Graeme? Are you well?
I'm very well. Are you well?
Yeah, can't complain. You know, like I've said to you recently a few times, counting my blessings, you know what I mean?
Counting your blessings. Well, we can find out why as we go along. Now, you're known as a member of Inspiral Carpets, who, you know, are tagged in with the Manchester scene of the 80s and 90s. You've had your own band, the Clint Boon Experience. You're a broadcaster, and I know you're an artist because I do a radio show and one of your artworks is on the studio wall. Basically, you've been earning your living as a creative all of your life to great success. But let's go back to the start. What were your experiences of education and when did the young Clint Boon know that they wanted to be a rock and roll star?
I was born in 1959 in Oldham, and I think as far back as I can remember, being 4, 5, 6-year-old, I was into music. I became obsessed with music, you know, from an early age. And back then it was people like Elvis Presley, you know, the 50s rock and roll music, which was fairly recent, obviously, at that point, and new even, you know. In the mid-60s, there was a lot of rock and roll music being made. And so I got the bug quite early. And I dreamed of being a rock star, a pop star. But I was never convinced I had what it took. You know, I never had any music skills as such. I wasn't a great singer. But I'd still dance in front of my mirror in the bedroom and pretend to be Elvis. Did all that stuff.
You say so. I was born in the early 60s. You were born in the late 50s, and I mean my first musical memories are kind of Motown. But even though you were born right at the end of the 50s, you really do remember like hearing rock and roll.
It was the first music that really touched me. I mean, I was aware of, you know, the music that was on the radio, like on Radio 1 in the 60s, which was the only radio station we had. I think I don't even think it was called Radio 1, was it? But so I remember hearing bands like Edison Lighthouse and Herman's Hermits and the Beatles on the radio, but it was the 50s rock and roll that really hit me hard. You know, it really got me in a primal way, which it still does. It is a very primal music to me. So I spent most of my childhood and youth dreaming of being a pop star, but not really doing anything about it, apart from absorbing as much music as I could. You know, I mean, I just developed an encyclopedic knowledge of music. And that was the age where, you know, in the late 60s, early 70s, we used to have magazines every week, like Disco 45, where you'd have the lyrics to all the top 20 records. So you could learn the words to all the, you know, the latest David Bowie record. You'd learn the words so that you could relate to your friends in the playground the day after, you know what I mean? So even though I wasn't, you know, learning to play an instrument as such, I wasn't practicing singing, but I was absorbing that knowledge and you know the detail of music, popular music. And I think it was only when punk happened in 1976, when I saw that happen, you know, that punk movement, was when I realised that actually working class kids like me with not much, you know, skill in the way of, you know, playing an instrument, we had a chance here. We could do it.
So it was like a do-it-yourself ethic, wasn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. It was partly the do-it-yourself ethic, but it was the realization that because before that, you know, up until 1975, 76, if you watched Top of the Pops and you'd see the, you know, a cross section of, you know, the latest hit parade, as they used to call it, you realise pretty quick that, you know, these were good musicians. You know what I mean? It's like to be in a band like the Sweet or the Rubettes, you know, which were the bands that I was following at the time. You had to be able to play your instrument, and you had to be able to sing, and you had to be a good dancer, and you know, and it was like that's why I always felt I was a bit too awkward for all that stuff. I loved it and I bought it, and you know, I lived and breathed it, but it wasn't, you know, I was never going to be David Bowie, you know what I mean? Or never going to be in David Bowie's band, you know what I'm saying? And then suddenly punk happened. It's like, bloody hell, that's Phil Diggle in the Buzzcocks, you know, his brother. Sorry, Steve Diggle in the Buzzcocks. And Steve's brother Phil was at college with me, at art college in Rochdale. And it just really hit home that this was on my doorstep now. Kids on my street were suddenly in these bands that were on top of the pops, you know what I mean? Yeah. So it's a real awakening for me. That December 76, I had the privilege of seeing the Sex Pistols at the Electric Circus in Manchester.
Wow, you were there. That sounds like an amazing night. I wish I could have been.
It wasn't the iconic and the famous gig at the Leicester Free Trade Hall was in July. I didn't go to that, but a few months after they came back and did the Electric Circus. So it's December the 7th, 9th of December, 1976, and we'd started getting into this punk movement that was starting to happen. We'd started buying these records, by brand new bands like the Stranglers and the Damned and the Ramones, this American band that was like nothing we'd ever seen. And so in the art college, we had like an open plan studio where we always used to work. And I was 17, I think, at the time.
Well, yeah, I was just saying, you're 17, so you could have gone to gigs. I was 14, and I just dreamed about going to gigs, but you could go.
Yeah, and we did. I mean, and it started that. I mean, we went down to Electric Circus. It was a Thursday night, right after college. We all went straight to this gig, and it was Johnny Thunder's Heartbreakers, the Buzzcocks, the Clash, and the Pistols. Four of the most influential bands of all time for £1.20. It was £1.20 to get in. And it was just, I know the punk movement in general was a turning point, but if there was a moment in time where I could say that's where everything pivoted, everything that I do now began at that moment. That was my ground zero that night.
Well, let's just, before we continue to the story of how you formed a band and how you started playing in a band, you've mentioned a couple of times Arts College. Tell us about that. How did you end up at Arts College? Because a lot of our students here are in the art school at Glyndwr University doing fine art and applied art and graphic design and etc. Tell us about how you started at Rochdale Art College.
Well, again, as far back as I can remember, I've always been into drawing and painting, photography. My dad was quite artistic. My dad used to do these amazing, he'd do copies of Constable oil paintings, and I've still got them, and they're identical. You know what I mean? Wow. The perfect copies. And Lowry, he used to copy Lowry paintings. So I grew up in a family where, art was a cool thing and it was an acceptable thing. And I always busied myself around visual arts, particularly photography. I got really into that as a kid. I joined the Shaw Photographic Society when I was like 10 or something. You know what I mean? A load of old blokes. But yeah, I would end up at art college. I was at a grammar school called Cardinal Langley in Middleton, just outside Manchester. It was the school where famously the Cougans went. Steve Coogan was at school when I was there. I think Paul Scholes might have gone there, the footballer. So they've got a few quite, influential alumni, as they call it. And it was a 5-year period in my life that I don't have any fond memories of it. I didn't enjoy it. I found the old concept of being in a school full of boys for 5 years, I found that quite alien, because my friends were all at comprehensive schools, mixed sex schools, and they were cool around girls. They knew how to have relationships, and I felt like, being in an all boys school was like just alien. It's like, what's this got to do with being a bloke growing up in this part of the world in this modern age? You know what I mean?
But were there any, as a grammar school, a boys' grammar school, did you do any creative subjects there?
The creative subjects were the only ones I enjoyed. Pottery, art, drama, music. We had music lessons. I couldn't really play anything, but I loved singing. And I was always told like I was singing too loud. I was shouting. Like whenever there's a school concert and I was part of a choir, I'd get pulled aside after and say, "You're shouting. You're singing too loud." You know what I mean? Boone. So
you went up. Did you want to go to college, or did it just be pushed into it?
I'll tell you the honest truth, Graeme, is that summer holidays when I left school at 15, with I think I managed to get an O level in physics or something ridiculous that I was shit at. So I didn't do that well at school at all. I think I got art and physics maybe, and then that school holidays, I didn't have a clue what I was going to do. I did not have a clue. I'd talked for years about possibly, studying to be a vet because I've always loved animals. And it was when I heard about a few of my friends going to this thing called art college, and I thought I'll give that a try because, you know, it sounds like it might be all right for me, that. And I applied for an interview, got to meet Mr. Solomon, who was this legendary principal of Rochdale Art College back in the day, and he just accepted me on the spot. He brought me in, and it was like I just stumbled into this perfect environment for a kid like me, because for 5 years at Cardinal Langley, I'd been punished physically for all the things that, you know, I later on made a living out of, you know, making my friends laugh, singing real loud, you know, burping in class, being a comedian. It was all like, we're at school, I felt like a lot of my creative tendencies were suppressed. And at art college, I was suddenly in this environment of adults, you know, teachers, tutors, whatever you want to call them, but they were all just so supportive of all these aspects of my personality, really, you know. So it was all encouraged, and it was a great time. It was like the you know, video technology was in its infancy. It was brand new. Video technology in 1975, when I went to art college, the man in the street didn't have it, and he was never, couldn't even dream of having it. It was like this amazing technology that was coming from Japan. I mean, the camcorders that we had were huge things, and you'd have like a belt pack with batteries all around it, and a massive umbilical going from the camera to the reel-to-reel video recorder. But we were allowed to use this sort of machinery, you know.
Sounds like something from Ghostbusters.
It looked like that. And we used to walk around Rochdale making these cool videos.
Have you still got them?
Oh, you know what? We haven't. I haven't, because at that point, we never dreamed that there was going to be a world where every household would have video technology. We did a film called Cool. Do you remember Cool and Luke, which was Steve McQueen, was it? Oh, it was one of
Paul Newman. Paul Newman and the boiled eggs, isn't it?
We did a 10 or 15 minute parody of that called Cool and Clint. And it was me with mirrored shades on, aviator shades, mirrored, biker jacket, jeans, rips in the knees, just walking around Rochdale acting absolutely iconic and cool. Right. So that was an example of what was going on in my head at the time. And people had mocked me, you know, for it. But, you know, guess what? That's what I do now, innit? It's like, you know, when I look around and see things like this, hang on a minute, excuse me. You know, it's like that sort of thing.
There you go. Classic, you know what I mean?
It's that iconography, innit, and that pop art. I was massively into Andy Warhol back then. And it's almost like it's the blueprint for what I've become.
So going to college basically gave you the chance to express yourself and be encouraged to express yourself.
And also to celebrate myself, and you know, and be openly proud of, you know, I couldn't play an instrument, I couldn't sing, but you know what, I can be as iconic as any bugger here. You know, it's like I can walk around looking cool with my mates filming me. You know, it's bizarre to think that that's a big part of what I do now. You know, Boone Army and all that. It's just like, yeah, come on, just let's celebrate who we are.
So you must have made new friends as well, because. So you go to the Electric Circus. So let's go back to the Electric Circus. You've seen the Sex Pistols, Johnny and the Heartbreakers. My God, how does that then translate from someone who's at art college who enjoys music? How does that then translate into being in a band?
The ironic thing is, the first thing I did was drop out of art college.
No,
it's because that was it. I knew everything.
Wow, you just knew.
Crystallized in that moment. So December 76, we saw the gig, and there's all this other stuff was happening. You know, the Pistols were on top of the pops, they were on the front page of the tabloids every day, and it was just that period. I just thought, right, I know where I'm going now, and I was due to go to university to study art, or you know, go and do a diploma in art or whatever. That was my plan at, you know, that point, and it just all went out the window. I thought, right, drop out of college. I think by February or March of 77, I was out of there. You know, a few months earlier than I should have been. I got a job in a local sheet metal factory to get money so that I could start buying, you know, machinery to make music with, tape recorders, amplifiers, guitars, microphones. Just started busying myself in that world of, you know, being around musicians, being around bands. I was like, I became the local groupie. I just hanging out with all the bands. I knew, you know, not groupie in the traditional sense, but I was.
So is that how you learned? You just went and hung out at concerts and gigs. But how did you find out what to buy? Because today, I mean, a lot of the students here are doing music technology or sound design or sound technology. And there's this great thing called the internet, which tells you everything and anything you want to know. But you are 17, 18. You've decided you want to be in a band. There's no internet. How do you know which amps to buy, which microphones to buy, how to work them?
I literally started hanging out with bands. So the local music scene in Oldham back then was quite healthy. There was a lot of great bands, pub bands that played in pubs every night. And I started hanging out with them, and I started driving them to places. I started booking gigs for some of them. So essentially being a manager. And it was while I was hanging out with those bands that I learned how a microphone works, and why are the valves in these amplifiers? What's that all about? How to string a guitar. Literally just started learning the skills of being in that world, and it was a great time as well because there was no internet. MIDI technology hadn't arrived yet. This is like, we're talking the end of the 70s, 78, 79, 80. And it was like, I was just collecting all sorts of junk, which I'm still surrounded with, believe it or not, in this room. A lot of it I've still got. And it was like just collecting like 8-track cassette cartridge players that you used to have in your car. Do you remember those things? Big clunky.
I do. Yeah.
And I got a couple of them. This is a typical experimental thing that I did in my quest to make sounds. I realised that these cartridges actually had a loop of tape in them, where a cassette tape was one piece of tape that started there and ended over here. The cartridges were a loop. So I got these cartridges, opened them up, cut the tape so it was just like a 11 or 12-inch loop, and then put it back together. Got a cartridge player out of a car, connected it to a car battery in my bedroom, and through my speaker. So I was doing things like just experimenting with sounds, and there was no sampling at that point. And essentially what I was doing was looking into that world of what became sampling. I'm not a pioneer by any means, but I think like a lot of other people, I bet you've done it as well in your time, where you just, through necessity and curiosity, you end up doing things that, you've never, I've never heard of anybody doing that. At that point, I'd never heard of anybody cutting tapes up. I know that.
What were you not listening? Did you not hear anything on music you were listening to? Not live bands, but recorded music that made you think, I wonder how they did that. That made you go and try and experiment. I mean, I'm thinking of Pink Floyd's "Money." That is a very famous. Alan Parsons did that loop with the tape. Anything else?
That was the period where I started thinking like that for the first time, because before that, I remember listening to great punk records and previously great rock and roll records, and never really thinking, that's a bass guitar I can hear, that's a 4-part vocal harmony I can hear in the background. I loved it and I absorbed it, but it was only, I think, in that period at the end of the 70s where I started really questioning what I was listening to. And I remember a bit of a groundbreaking record was when Howard Devoto left Buzzcocks.
Oh yeah,
for Magazine.
Brilliant.
I remember in Magazine, that Real Life album, the opening track was like, what is that noise? What is that sound? You know, the synths, and it was like, Jesus, what is this? So I think that was a moment in my life where I started really questioning what I was listening to and what these sounds were and how I could possibly replicate them, and it led nicely into a period of collecting any junk I could get, including a lot of 60s keyboards. I couldn't play keyboards, but I was buying these things because I liked the way they sounded. And I ended up, from the sheet metal factory job, which only lasted 6 months or so, I ended up, I think it was probably late 78, I joined this furniture company that was based in Ashton-under-Lyne. And the guy that owned the company was an old friend of my mum and dad, so I went working with him. Within a couple of years, I'd become a company director because his partner pulled out, and he offered me shares in the company because I was a very loyal employee. So I ended up, by 1980, I think I would have turned 21, 80, 81 maybe. I was a company director, and we had quite a big premises and a lot of empty space in it, a lot of empty rooms that weren't being used. And that's where I built the Mill recording studio, which was a very primitive 4-track cassette-based machine. It was like I've still got it down here, Tascam 234. That was the heart of my multi-track recording setup. and bands used to come and rehearse in there, and I used to produce demos for bands.
So you still weren't playing in a band at this point. You were still just kind of managing. You got your own studio and hanging out with bands.
Absolutely. Until I think it was like 1983 where I formed my first proper band, which was The Mill. And I was in a pub in Oldham watching a band called The Exit. They were called Wheatstone's Bridge and they became The Exit. Their drummer, Chris Goodwin, became a good friend of mine. And I used to go and watch this band. And one night at the gig at the Miners Arms in Oldham, this is at the end of 83, I think, Chris said, "Oh, this is my mate. Come and meet my mate. This is Manny." And Manny was this young, late teens kid from Failsworth. He could play guitar, he could play bass. Chris was a drummer. I had all these keyboards. I was doing a bit of singing, and I said, "How about we get together tomorrow and do some jamming? I've got a little studio down in Ashton. Let's get together and do some jamming and just start." And we went down the next day was a Sunday, and then for the next year and a half, we went down pretty much every Sunday and recorded onto the multi-track cassette. And again, I've still got all the tapes up here.
You've got it. Brilliant.
I've still got more. Yeah, never been released, and it's me, Manny, Chris Goodwin. Manny obviously went on to be in the Stone Roses. Chris went on to form a band called The High, and I went on to join the Inspiral Carpets. So The Mill was, I'll say seminal. I think that's the right word. A seminal little moment in time in terms of Manchester music, which, you know, predated the Manchester thing by a few years, and I'm quite proud of it. So suddenly I was in that environment of, you know, I was a musician, I suppose, at this point. I was playing keyboards and singing, and it was into that chapter that I suddenly got a phone call one day saying, we're a band from Oldham. We want to come and record a demo at your studio if we can. We're called the Inspiral Carpets. And that was another pivotal moment in my life, the day that those guys walked into my studio.
Wow, absolutely.
And I think I recorded 2 demo sessions, like 3 or 4 songs at a time. Cost probably 30 quid, I think I used to charge. I can't remember, something like that. And I think by the time they did the second visit with me, I was in love with the music of the Inspiral Carpets. They didn't have keyboards. They were just a pure punk, really raw punk sounding band from Oldham. So they were from the streets I'd grown up on. They're into the same bands that I was into.
Had you heard them before, or had you come to see them live?
They were unknown. They were just, to me, they were unknown. And I knew all the bands on the Oldham music scene. And these were just a bunch of lads who'd been jamming in Graham's dad's garage. I think they used to play in his garage, and occasionally the neighbours' kids would come and sit on the driveway and watch like a gig sort of thing. Proper garage band, you know what I mean? But I fell in love with it and realised pretty early on that if I brought in one of these electric organs that I've got, like the 1966 Farfisa Compact Duo particularly, which is this really shrill 1960s transistor instrument.
How did you discover that, though? How did you discover that Farfisa?
Going back a couple of years to, well, it was probably about 81 when I got it, collecting those machines that were going to help me to make sounds. It's purely that. I never wanted to be a keyboard player. I didn't set out to be a keyboard player.
You just wanted to get it for the sound.
I accumulated machines, yeah. And I got the Farfisa Compact Duo. I got a Vox Continental. I've still got all these things as well. But the Farfisa in particular, I thought if I play that with this Inspiral Carpets band, it'll sound like Question Mark and the Mysterians. It'll sound like the Seeds. It'll sound like the Doors. It'll sound like all these amazing, 13th floor elevators. These cool 60s psychedelic garage bands from the States. And I said to Graeme one night, because me and Graeme, the guitarist, we'd become friendly at this point, and I said, look, how about I bring this in and we do a bit of jamming, because I think it'll sound really good on your music. And we wheeled it in to the room where the band were rehearsing, played it, and it just like, wow, that's it.
It just fitted, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean,
because you say that when Inspiral Carpets, before you joined, which is like a punk band, I'm just trying to imagine some of your hits, some of your songs without you, and you're right, it is kind of punky. But when you mentioned the 13th floor elevators and Question Mark and the Mysterians, that's exactly what you brought to that sound.
Yeah, and it was, I wasn't a pioneer. All I was doing was ripping off what I'd heard, from
that's what popular musicians do anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's all about, what's the word? There's a nice way of saying it. Stealing. What's the word when you're?
It's like being influenced by things. Whether you're a musician or an artist, or a photographer, you can't be. I don't think anyway. You can be totally unique because you've got so much inspiration around you.
Yeah, even David Bowie was, he was the king of that one. He took from everybody from Anthony Newley through to Iggy Pop when he got to know Iggy, and Kraftwerk. The great artists are all borrowing from previous generations of music, aren't they?
No, exactly. It's exact borrowing, not stealing. It's borrowing.
Yeah, there's another word.
And passing it on.
Yeah,
passing it on to future generations. So you end up in Spiral Carpets, and as a self-taught musician with just some crazy ideas. Next thing, you're on Top of the Pops. How did that feel?
It felt brilliant because it's what I dreamed about. From being 5, 6, 7-year-old. It's like watching Top of the Pops on Thursday nights on the TV right after Tomorrow's World. That was like the highlight of my week was that Thursday night.
Can you remember who else was on Top of the Pops when you were on that first time?
Primal Scream. I think they did Loaded.
Mm-hmm.
And they had Mark Gardner out of Ride, bizarrely playing keyboards with them. I think they were on Creation, weren't they? Ride. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Ride and Primal Scream were on Creation Records. We did it a lot around that period. We did Top of the Pops a lot, and there's always, the dance rave type bands like
there's loads of them on, yeah.
Snap. You got the power. Yeah. Delight.
No, but were there any massive stars that you thought, I can't believe I'm sharing a studio with someone really big?
God, you know what? That's a good question.
To be honest, though, at that period, early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, British rave culture and the Manchester thing just kind of took over Top of the Pops, didn't it?
Yeah, so we were those massive artists, weren't we, all of a sudden? I mean, I've always been in awe, of some of these other names and, the names I'd grown up with. I mean, we got to do a gig with Paul Simon in Argentina a few years later. And I actually passed him in the corridors. I was backstage. He was on his way to the stage to do his gig, and I walked past him. I just nodded. I didn't even say anything. But to me, that was like, fucking, I'll just walk past Paul Simon, and I'm in his support band for the night. So I've always had those, those in awe moments. But yeah, I can't remember. I think when we're doing, I think that 1990, 91 was such a beautiful whirlwind of energy and positive love for the band and that I think sometimes I probably was a bit distracted and didn't realise everything that was going on around me. I never took it for granted, but it was suddenly it was like all the spotlight was on us, and it felt like we were the centre of the world, or Manchester was. It's like every interview we did, in every corner of the globe, we were asked about this beautiful city. What's Manchester like?
It was the centre of the world. I mean, I'm not from Manchester, but I DJed for many years at the greatest club there ever was, the Hacienda. And some Friday nights when me and Mike were DJing, you just look at the dance floor that you were there, the Gallaghers were there. Mick Hucknall would be there.
Joe Strummer.
Yeah.
I saw him in the because obviously coming out of the punk generation, and then being in the middle of this rave, and it's like I couldn't believe these two worlds had crossed over. I saw Joe Strummer in the Hacienda, and Nico out of the Velvet Underground. She'd be at the bar. She was living in Manchester at that point, wasn't she? Nico was at the bar.
Yeah.
Nico at Velvet Underground, this fucking goddess of music, was at the bar in the Hacienda, and Strummer was there. And Sean Ryder was getting up to mischief with his mates in the little booth downstairs at the back.
Yeah. Well, great times.
Yeah.
And now Bez is on Dancing on Ice. Anyway, so how long did that last in Spiral Carpets? Because obviously you went on to do the Clint Boon experience. How did that come about?
What happened with the Inspirals in a nutshell was we signed to Mute Records, which is still to this day, a big part of, we're a big part of each other's family. Mute Records signed us for a 5-album deal. We did 4 albums, and then on the eve of recording the 5th, Mute decided they didn't want to carry on for the final year of the deal, which was very, it's quite routine and ordinary thing to happen in the world of pop music, innit? So they dropped us essentially, and this would be, 1994, late 94. So in 94, we were still playing places like Glastonbury. We were still doing Top of the Pops. By early 95, we were self-managed. We were looking for a new record deal, and we couldn't find anything. And I think it was basically because Manchester was pretty much over. Britpop hadn't been christened Britpop yet, so none of us knew what was going to happen next. Grunge was massive. You know, it was all Nirvana and Pearl Jam and Soundgarden and all that was like, you know, they were the new kids on the block. And I think that's why we couldn't really get a deal, not the kind of record deal we felt we needed. So in spring of '95, we decided amicably to knock it on the head. Let's just, you know, get off, do our own thing, maybe revisit this in a few years' time, maybe never revisit it, but always be, you know, thankful that it happened. And it was very, very amicable. I remember we had a meeting in my house in Milnrow, my front room in Milnrow, where we decided that was it. And, you know, everybody drove away. And I remember feeling really sad about it, but really excited that this was probably a great time to start exploring some of my other creative skills, really. And I carried on writing from the first minute the band left my house. I carried on writing and recording at home. I had a little home studio. Those recordings became the basis of the Clint Boon Experience catalogue. But at the same time, I started doing music for television. I started doing bits of radio. I went back to DJing in clubs. I started doing.
Hang on, you say you went back to DJing in clubs. You never mentioned when you started DJing.
Oh yeah, sorry. I started DJing. I don't know if I've ever told you. So I started in 1975.
No, this is news to me.
Right, okay. When I was 15, me and a couple of friends set up a mobile disco called the Royton Interchange Disco Roadshow, because that's the kind of name you had to have back then.
Yeah.
And we were doing like local community events and Irish nights. One of the lads in the disco with me, John, he was in an Irish family, and they were very closely involved with the local Irish community and the Irish club. So we used to do these Irish nights, playing Irish records and, you know, like traditional Irish tunes and bands like the Indians or the Chieftains, I can't remember what they're called, and we'd do these big Irish nights, and then we'd be doing somebody's wedding down the local pub at some point. And so that started in '75. So right up until, you know, when I met Manny and Chris, I was still DJing then, 84, 85. And it was only when the Inspirals took off that I sort of stopped DJing for a few years.
So you went back to it.
So yeah, 1975. Put that in your notes. That's when I started DJing. I'm still doing it now. I've got a gig tonight. But so yeah, it's when the Inspirals took a break, I started DJing, started doing radio. You know, little bits of radio. I didn't realise that was going to become my career, but it did very soon. And I did educational stuff as well. In 1995, I can put my hand on my heart and say there wasn't much support for musicians or people that wanted to get into the music industry in the whole of the UK. There was hardly anything. And I say that because I was doing my best to root out people that I could probably connect with and swap notes on seminar ideas. I was doing it with Oldham Council. It's called Start 95. And I'd get people in to do, you know, like Q&As in front of an audience of, you know, musicians, you know, local bands, people that wanted to get into the world of management or publishing or TV. So I'd get people like Janice Long to come and talk to them about her story. I got Terry Christian in to do it. I got Caroline Ellery, a big publisher at the time. So I used to do a lot of stuff like that, and then going out into the community and, you know, doing DJ workshops. I borrowed all the gear off a big DJ shop that was in Juicy House. I can't remember the name of it. In Manchester.
Yeah.
They lent us the decks, and, you know, and we'd get all the kids, we'd go into like the Asian community and set up in the youth club. Come on, we'll teach you how to be DJs and that. Not that I could DJ like.
No, but this is part of the creative process, because come on, you must have made a few quid out of the Spiral Carpets. So did you need to be going out doing this stuff, or could you put your feet up for a bit? No,
to be honest with you, at that point, I needed it. I mean, my second child had just been born. I still had a big mortgage to sort out. I had a lot of bills and a lifestyle. I suppose you develop a lifestyle, don't you? That you're used to, you know, eating in this way, and, you know, you drink a certain amount a week or whatever, and whatever else you're up to. So, yeah, I mean, I needed to keep the money coming in. And you know what? That's always been the case for me. It's like through the pandemic that we just had, it was like I found myself, I kept busy because through necessity, I needed to keep that money coming in. You know, I've still got a young family and a lot of bills to pay. So, yeah, through the pandemic, I kept those income streams working, and so I've always been. No, we'll come to the pandemic shortly, but just tell us. You mentioned radio, so tell us how you got into radio, because I'm sure
I mean, like me, that was never on my horizon. It just happened. Tell us how it happened for you.
Well, first of all, going back to 1970, when I got my first cassette tape recorder, my mum and dad bought it me for Christmas. And one of the most horrific things I ever heard was my voice played back for the first time.
It
Because
happens to all of us.
I was 10 or 11, I'd never heard my voice apart from live in my head. Which sounded all right, but old accents never. When I heard it played back on a cassette tape, it was like, geez, that is horrific. So I never dreamed I'd be able to make a living out of talking. Fast forward to 95, Inspirals took a break. I got invited by a friend of mine at BBC Wales. She's called Jane Morris, a producer. She was due to be at the Reading Festival in 95 with a presenter called Adam that worked on BBC Wales. And he was due to be... Yeah. It's Adam, what's his second name?
I know him, and I can't remember.
Yeah, he's still there. Adam's still there. But yeah, Jane was his manager. She was a friend of ours. And she said to me, Adam can't make it to Reading. We've got all these interviews lined up with artists backstage. How do you fancy coming down and doing it? Because I'd mentioned, one time when she was at our house, I was mentioning about, I want to diversify now. I've been in the Inspirals for 10 years, playing keyboards, writing songs. Anyway, so Jane said, do you fancy coming doing these interviews for me? So I went down to Reading for the I wasn't playing at Reading. I went down to, work for the Beeb, really. And I got to interview some people that I knew, some that I didn't know, but Shed 7, Echo Belly, Sleeper, Echo and the Bunnymen, the Boo Radleys. It was basically Britpop. It was Britpop, all the Britpop artists at Reading, I was interviewing them backstage. And I'd never interviewed people, but, I was comfortable with a microphone because I've been in the Inspirals all this time and, I'd been interviewed a lot. So while I'm doing these interviews, Janice Long spotted me. And after I finished the interview with whoever it was, she came over and she said, I didn't know you were doing radio. And I said, well, I'm doing a bit of everything at the moment. I'm just testing the water. And I said, right, well, I'm about to launch a radio station in Liverpool. Why don't you come and do a show for us? Right?
Chef M.
Chef M. So I was doing a Saturday tea time show and a Sunday morning show for a month. And it was the first time really that I was able to, share my taste in music with an audience live. It was probably only scores of people rather than hundreds, but they set us up in a school near Penny Lane in Liverpool. It was during the school holidays, I think, or the half term or something. A proper like ramshackle setup. But we did it for a month and it gave me a little bit of a taste for it. So then after that, there was all these things popping up called Rsl Broadcasts.
Yeah. They're temporary FM licenses for everyone.
Yeah, that's right. So if you, I think sometimes if you're looking at setting up a radio station, you need to convince the broadcasting people, Ofcom, that you're capable of operating it as a. So we did these RSLs. A lot of people doing RSLs around Manchester, and I kept getting the call saying, "Do you want to come and do this?" We're doing a 4-week broadcast in the Oxfam shop on Oldham Street was one of them. You know what I mean? They just pop up these radio stations in weird places. And I started doing them, again, just because I like the idea of sharing my taste in music. And then I started I was friends with Terry Christian, I still am. And he was working for Century FM. He did a really cool evening show. It was a brilliant listen. And he started getting me standing in for him when he was off. So suddenly my CV started looking quite good, in terms of radio work. And then the Inspirals got back together in 2003. I think 2003. And we did an interview with Tom Robinson. I think me and Tom were interviewed by Tom Robinson on his show on BBC Six Music. And at the end of the interview, when we finished off mic, he said, "You sound really good on the radio, Clint." And so I've been doing a bit, And he said, "I'm going away in August for 2 weeks. Why don't you do my show for me?" So Six Music then was like, we all loved it and respected it. It wasn't the huge thing that it is today. It was still in its infancy in a lot of ways, and it nearly closed down at one point, didn't it, Six? But anyway, so I found myself in London for 2 weeks. This is 18 years ago now, doing this BBC Six Music show every day for 2 weeks. They put us up me and Charlie, my wife, in the hotel next door to Broadcasting House. That's where we conceived our eldest child, Oscar, who's now nearly 18, and he's a bass player. But it was like, God, this could possibly be a great career opportunity. You know what I mean? I got a real taste for it. And then next thing you know, XFM were asking me to help them to win the Manchester license, which I did, you know, which we did. We got the license, and I've been in full-time radio ever since. And it's
so
like
you're currently on in Manchester every day, aren't you?
XS Manchester. I'm 6 days a week. Well, 5 days live, one pre-recorded show for Saturday. But yeah, it's like I've been there for 5 years. Before that, I was at Radio X for a couple of years. Before that, XFM, which became Radio X. I did a year and a half at the Revolution, which you're familiar with, up in Oldham. So it's like it's almost like since that Tom Robinson moment, I've been a full-time radio presenter, and also I can't believe it. Like, this Oldham accent has made me living in radio for 20 years or something.
It's interesting because a lot of creatives that I've speak to over the years, there's a common thread here, and that is you know you want to do something creative, but you're not sure how. I mean, it's different now because people can go and get degrees and talk to people like me and you and get that advice. But you just muddle through and you found your way, and you end up doing things you never expected to do. I mean, what advice would you give to the people watching this? I mean, if you're not sure what you want to do, what advice would you give to them?
What I've done is that just, even though, you know, my mission was to become a professional musician, say, or a pop star, whatever you want to call it, along the way, these other doors open. Like, somebody will say, do you want to come and do a radio show for me? Like Janice did, or Jane did, Jane Morris. Part of me could have said, I'm not a radio presenter, I'm a musician, I'm a singer. You know what I mean?
That's exactly the way I look at it as well. Absolutely.
Yeah, when those doors open, I've never been scared of saying, all right, yeah, I'll have a look in here, see what this is all about. You know what I mean? And I think I still look at how my dad was when I was a kid. My dad, we were a very, you know, working class family from Oldham. I say working class, they met in the cotton mills, they worked in the cotton mills when I was a kid. And as time went on, my dad developed all these other income streams. So I can remember a moment in time in the late 60s where he was, you know, he had the corner shop. He was breeding poultry to sell in the shop. He was still doing window cleaning on and off. He was a real handyman, my dad, you know, and he had a lot of skills, a lot of manual skills, including being able to completely replicate Constable oil paintings. And I think I always look back at my dad as being a man who had a lot of hats that he could put on. And I think that still inspires me to this day. Like, particularly when the pandemic came, it was like, I mean, we'll come to it in a minute, but that was a real, for me, it was a real enlightened, I felt a real enlightenment that it reminded me that I'm capable, no matter how shit things have gone, I can keep that money coming in one way or another. You know what I mean?
I got a question from Nia, because she said, she posted this question. We were talking about the bands you used to go and see, but it's kind of, I think it's relevant now. She said, did the bands that you go to see allow you to create a network to help you become who you are now? But how important is a network? Even someone like yourself, who's known for being a broadcaster and a musician, how important is it to have a network?
I think in my case, it's been vital. I'm assuming Mia is she like late teens?
Nia. Yeah, she will be. She'll be. I don't know how old she is, but she's not a mature student. Put it that way.
Right. Okay. Cool. Because the best thing I can, like, we've got the internet now. And you've got a network like Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, whatever you want to use. You know, going back 15 years ago, it was MySpace, which was a brilliant network for musicians. When the Inspiral started in the mid 80s, the network that we had was fanzine culture. Like, literally, kids around the country making their own fanzines out of, you know, a bunch of A4 paper stapled together.
I forgot. I used to in East Midlands. I used to run one called Creased Like This. Yeah.
And you know, we'd go to a gig at the Boardwalk to see. So we'd go and see, you know, the Shop Assistants or whatever, you know, some indie band, and there'd be probably 7 or 8 kids in that crowd in Manchester that had come from other parts of the UK. There'd be somebody there from Brighton and somebody from Glasgow and somebody from Mablethorpe, and they'd have their fanzines, and they'd be swapping them. They'd be selling them to people like us. And they'd be swapping them with other fanzine writers, you know, from Manchester, say. And that was the network. And I've still got a lot of these fanzines. And when reading through them now and thinking, I was reading one the other day that I stumbled across, and it's like a review of the Inspirals with our first single, Keep the Circle Around, it was called. The Plane Crash EP, Keep the Circle was the title track. And reading this review from like 1987 and thinking, these people, these kids were like a massive reason why we became, a national success, because it meant that people around the country knew about us. So when we went and did a gig in Brighton, these kids that had read about us in the fanzine would be there. At the same time, John Peel was starting to play our music as well, which was a massive bonus for us, because that really speeded things up when Peel got on board. But yeah, the fanzine culture back then, that was our internet. That's as simple as that. As simple as that was our internet, because we weren't going to be on the front of the enemy for a couple of years yet. But fanzines were really interested in bands like us, and it was it was a beautiful little moment in time again, that fanzine culture in the UK. So networking, to answer your question, being part of a network is definitely, in my case, it's been vital all the way through my career.
You mentioned the pandemic, COVID-19, and I know, like me, you lost a massive income stream from performing live.
Yeah.
And you mentioned earlier about trying to keep the money coming in because you've got a lifestyle. I know what you mean by there. The more you earn, the more you spend, right? How did you cope with the pandemic, though? Because, like I say, like me, your whole life, probably your main income stream went out. So how did you cope with the pandemic?
The first couple of weeks, I didn't cope. I just shit myself completely. Let me just get a bit of a backstory on our family. I mean, we've been homeschooling our kids for like 10 years now. So
you've not got enough on, so you thought you'd homeschool your kids, right?
Yeah. Well, you know what? It goes back to that punk thing, that do-it-yourself thing. That's why I've always liked the idea of homeschooling. And there came a point in our life, me and Charlie, my wife, where it was just, now's the time to do it. Let's homeschool. So 10 years ago, we took our 2 kids out of school at the time. And we've got 3 boys now. We've got 11, 15, 17. So we've been homeschooling for 10 years. So my wife, Charlie, doesn't work. She didn't have an income at this point when the pandemic happened. I had the radio gig at XS Manchester, and I was, busy DJing. I had such a brilliant 2020 diary. I mean, my diary just looked amazing. Probably
me too, yeah.
My busiest year ever of DJing just ahead of me, and it was just like, great. This is where I can get straight with the tax and pay the mortgage off a bit, whatever. Get a decent car, upgrade my 10-year-old Saab, whatever. Anyway, so we got news Christmas 2019. We heard that the radio station was going to be changing its format to Capital, what they call it, Extra. So I was going to be out of work as a radio presenter. I was going to be out of work. This is 2019 Christmas. This is before anybody was talking about pandemics. So I knew I had 3 months before I was out of the radio gig. So I just filled up my diary with even more DJ work than usual. March came, 2020, pandemic, everything's shutting down. My diary just emptied, like a year and a half of bookings, actual bookings just went overnight. 6-figure sum of money, as you know. So I'd lost that income, and I was about to lose the radio income as well. So when we went into that pandemic in March, early April of 2020, I was looking at this family having 0 income, right? 0 income, nothing coming in whatsoever, which was scary. What divine intervention happened, and Ofcom, the radio regulators, turned around to the people that own XS Manchester, and for the first time in history said, we're not letting you change your format. You've got to keep doing what you're doing because Manchester needs it. Mm-hmm. There was a big petition online, people saying you've got to save XS Manchester. I'd written it off in my mind, we were losing it, but suddenly we get this call saying, right, Ofcom, you won't believe it, we're carrying on. And to the credit, the company that owns the radio station said, right, let's carry on, let's build it, let's keep it going. They could have given the license back. They could have said, no, we don't want it. You have it, give it to someone else. So that was like a bit of a lifesaver, because it meant that we had some income coming in through the pandemic. Not a massive income. It's not the biggest part of my income.
But radio never is.
No, it's not. It used to be, didn't it? It used to be in the old days.
No, it used to be. Unless you're a breakfast show presenter on a massive station.
Yeah,
there's not much money in it.
I mean, I'd say for the hours of the day that my show takes, to do, including travelling, if I was driving an Uber, I'd be getting more money. You know what I mean? So, which,
sad but true, yeah.
Yeah, but, not wrong with driving an Uber. I envy taxi drivers sometimes because they're sat there in a nice car listening to whatever they want on the, you know what I mean? And chat shit all day with people. So it's a great way to make a living, isn't it? Anyway, so I realised pretty quickly, early on in the pandemic, I was going to have to create some income streams here to make up for the lost DJ money. And the best one that I started doing, or the biggest one, was doing my cow art. So for years and years, I've been drawing the Inspirals cow logo, which is a funky little cow thing that in fact, I'll show you one. I've got one here.
Yeah, there's one of the radio show that the radio station I work in's got one of them on the wall. Yeah.
So this cow here, it was the Inspirals logo. I invented it in the late 1980s. Long story, but that became our logo. So over the years, whenever anybody's asked me to, donate something for a charitable auction or whatever, like, if you've got signed records and whatever, I've always done these cow drawings for charity. And they fetch a lot of money. They go for hundreds of pounds, these things, at the auction. So I've always said to my wife, if I ever get stuck for dosh, I'll just start selling these, for us. So that's what I started doing in the early on in the pandemic. So I think by March or April of 2020, I was doing these.
Excellent.
Sat at home all day drawing cows, colouring them in, like commission. People say I want it with a blue shirt, I want it with a United shirt. And it did the trick. It brought a load of money in that we needed. And then I started selling merchandise, like the cow mug that I showed you before. All that, T-shirts. Started that, which is an obvious thing to do. And, with this world of really cool apps that we're living at the moment, like Shopify was selling the merch, Etsy was selling my art. And then I started making new music and putting that out on Patreon, again with a following that was paying a couple of quid a month. So just created all these income streams. And even though it wasn't the most glamorous way to get through 2020, but I was so proud that I was able to do it,
I think that's a really good example you're setting here, because you've been around, in the kindest of ways, you've been around the block a few times, right? You've had a checkered past, but rather than go, oh no, we are knackered, you thought, right, well, how can I use my creative mind to get us of a whole, and I think that's fantastic, and I think hopefully everyone will get something out of that. We're nearing the end of the session. I've got some quick questions. Paul would like to know what it was like to work on 24-Hour Party People, playing the part of a train conductor, and how did you get that gig?
I got contacted by Michael Winterbottom. He was the guy that made the film. I'd never met him. He got in touch saying, we're going to make this movie based in this this era, the Manchester era, but within that we're going to be touching on the punk scene in Manchester. He knew that I was part of that age, and he just wanted to brainstorm my ideas, my memories of the Electric Circus and the punk era in Manchester and Manchester, obviously. So I had a meeting with Michael in Manchester. This was a couple of years before they actually got to make the film, and I just told him my memories, and he made loads of notes and all that. And then the day after the meeting, I got a call from his assistant saying he'd like you to be in the film. Do you fancy a cameo in the film? And as a result of that call, I said, yeah, obviously. And that's how I ended up playing Ernie, the train guard. And it's great. I mean, it's one of my favourite films ever, not because I'm in it, but because it celebrates that chapter of Manchester's history that was a big part of. And it celebrates it beautifully. It's like it's not factually, correct. It's a lot of it's just so surreal and nonsensical, but it really captures the madness of that era. I think you'll probably agree, won't you?
It does. But it's also as well that the fact that they rebuilt the interior of the hacienda to the millimeter, and got me and Mike Pickard to DJ for the set. It's the only nightclub scene of any film that I've ever seen that I think's accurate.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. The film capture. I didn't go to the set that was built. I didn't go to that.
Oh, it was weird. It was like going back in time.
It's incredible because they got the actual drawings, didn't they? The actual Ben Kelly plans and rebuilt it.
Here's another question from Darina. She wants to know what your favourite nightclub is and your favourite song to play as a DJ.
Oof. Favourite nightclub, South Nightclub, which I've been DJing at for well over 20 years now. I did it.
That's in Manchester.
In Manchester, yeah. It's a little, basement, sticky dance floor. But yeah, I love working there. And through the pandemic, I was convinced we'd lost it. I thought there's no way I'll be going back in there. It's going to shut. And it got saved. And it's still. I'm doing it monthly now rather than weekly. But for 20 years, at least 21 years, maybe I did it every Saturday. And it was just.
Come on, pick a favourite song to play.
Favourite song these days? Wow, God. It was Pounding by Doves for a long time. Okay. Pounding. Oh God, it's a hard one, that, isn't it?
I know. Listen, people ask me all the time. I can never answer.
Here's one that'll throw you. It's not of my era, but Sam Fender, Hypersonic Missiles.
All right, okay.
It's a modern classic that's anthemic and goosebumps. Yeah. I love playing that.
Here's a question from Leanne. Has Graham Lambert's father's song "In Spiral Carpet" ever been sung by the Spiral Carpets, or have you ever used any of the lyrics in any other context other than the naming of the band?
Well, I didn't understand the first part of that question. Give it again. I'm intrigued.
Leanne says, has Graham Lambert's father's song "In Spiral Carpet" ever been sung by the Spiral Carpets?
I don't think so. So.
That's a simple answer.
Yeah.
Catherine wants to know, have you ever written or are you planning to write an autobiography?
Yes, I haven't done yet. I've written a lot of pieces over the years that will be in a book eventually. But I'm currently in talks with a publisher, a guy called Jake Lingwood, he's a really lovely bloke and he's really encouraging me to get on with it. So my issue at the moment is my working week still doesn't have any large.
It's finding the time, isn't it? Finding the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's one of those. I know that when you commit to writing a book, because I've got friends who've done this. Once you commit to doing it and you take that advance, whatever, you're under pressure then to get it for the deadline. It seems like it's quite a heavy amount of pressure, but I don't want to do it until I know that I've got the right amount of time in my working week. But yeah, there will be a book. And I've got the opening chapters written. There's a lot of middle chapters written. Yeah, there will be a book, definitely.
Right, a few quick fire questions towards the end. One of the tasks that my students have to do is to work in groups and with people they might not have ever met before, and people from different areas, like artists working with music tech people, etc., etc. You must have had to work with people from different areas that you might not necessarily have got on with in the past. What's your advice for working in a group with people you've never met before?
Again, just embrace it, take the opportunity. I remember that the last Inspirals gig before we split up in '95, we did a tour of Europe, a traditional, it was us and Moby and Miranda Sex Guardian doing a tour, if I remember rightly. But the last gig we did before we split was us playing at the Royal Northern College of Music, doing instrumental versions of 3 of our songs behind a dance troupe. I can't remember what the dance troupe were called, but it was much in the vein of The Fall with Michael Clark, was he called, the guy that danced with The Fall. It was very similar sort of setup to that. And again, at the time, I think a lot of bands would have said, we're not doing that. We don't do shit like that. But we did it. And I was just proud that that first chapter of our career, because that's where it ended in '95. We went out on such a surreal note. But so yeah, I'm never scared of embracing those sort of collaborations, and I think it's something that, art is art, and within that we've got all these amazing mediums, and there's no reason why we shouldn't be crossing over with each other's stuff.
I was going to ask you about career highlights, but it's been one big long highlight by the sound of things. Low points. Well, I suppose COVID for all of us was a low point, but you managed to turn that into a positive.
I wouldn't even say that was my lowest point, Graeme. I think my lowest point was when we did split in '95. Even though I embraced the idea of having time to do other things, financially I took a hit, and I had to sign on for probably 18 months. I was signing on, getting the door.
Really? Wow.
From late '95 into '96. That was a bit of a low point because it was like, it felt like, is that the end of everything? Is that the end now that Inspirals has gone? Will I ever get back to where I need to be? Which I did. And if anything, it gave me the incentive to get up and make it happen. But yeah,
how long can you keep going?
Sorry?
How long do you keep going?
What, from now to the end?
Yeah.
Till the end.
You're going to do a Tommy Cooper?
Well, you know what? Probably, yeah. I do think that a lot when I'm, especially.
Me too. Maybe we should do a gig together in 20 years' time and do it together.
You know what? It's when I work all the time, so I'm sure that when I do go, it'll be while I'm working. And you know,
any regrets? Any regrets from the past 40 years or so, 50 years?
You know what? One of my regrets. I mentioned I was always a keen photographer. My one regret is, and I took more photographs than anybody I've ever met. I should have taken more. And I should have. As a photographer, there's the obvious thing in front of you that you're photographing. Turn around and photograph what's behind you.
Right.
Because behind you is Liam Gallagher and Noel Gallagher watching the Pixies at such a gig, and you know what I mean. So it's like I'm a mad photographer. I photograph things all the time, every day, just on my phone or whatever. And yeah, I wish I'd taken more photographs. I've got some beauties, but I wish I'd taken more.
And one last question I'd like to ask all our guests: What would you tell your younger self? If you could go back in time, what would you tell the young Clint?
You're going to do all right. You're going to do all right. You're going to live longer than you thought. You're going to live longer than you think you're going to live. I'm 62. I'll be 63 in June. And that kid watching the Sex Pistols back in '76, I wouldn't have thought I was going to be around at this point of life. And you know what's even better is that kid in '76. If he'd have seen years later me interviewing John Lydon and Malcolm McLaren and Hugh Cornwell out the Stranglers, it's like, fucking hell, what a career, you know, what an amazing career. I'm not the most successful person in the entertainment industry, but the journey that I've had has just been incredible, really. And it's still carrying. You know what I mean? It's like,
well, long may it continue, and hopefully I'll see you in the flesh soon. Please give a massive thank you to Clint Boon. Thank you, Clint.
Thank you guys for listening. Oh, good. Yeah, good luck with your careers, everybody.